Hey all, welcome to the summer of 2022, PSC 101, basically Introduction to American and Nevada Politics, online version. Welcome. My name is Francis Carlton. I'm the instructor for this course. We'll be hanging out remotely, asynchronously for the next 8 weeks. I see here that I've got work to do on the lighting situation. So I know I have one of those ring lights. I just need to dig it up. And forgive the chaos behind me. Just pretend that's not there. All right. So hopefully you've had a chance. Well, I think by definition, since you're watching this, you've had a chance to take a look at the Canvas version of this course. I will be building that out throughout the summer. I don't mount all of the material at once because that would be too much, honestly. So we'll do it kind of one or two modules at a time, one or two chunks of material at a time. I don't want to overwhelm anybody. It's a relatively content-rich offering. So I will build that out. And I will frequently update you as to where you should be in terms of the modules. The modules, again, really just kind of like saying chapters in a way, chunks of material. So I'm trying to think how to do this. I think what I'll do here is I'll walk you all through the syllabus, and that's how we'll get started. Now I'll probably make some observations about how to use the Canvas version of this course to maximum benefit for y'all. Okay, so it is PSC 101. I give you my phone number there. I give you my cell phone because really giving my office phone is not useful. So it's right 702-487-0148. That's mostly really for texting if there's an emergency. All right, but that's a kind of a backup if you feel pressed for time and there's a deadline or something and you just feel like you need to get a hold of me as quickly as possible. There's that. All right. The more standard way, of course, is at francis.carlton@csn.edu. I would just note the spelling of Carlton. It's a variation. It's Carleton. Not sure why the E is there, but it is. And it's not where you would expect it to be. If there's any E at all, typically in Carlton there's no E. But if you don't get that spelling right, my only point is if you don't get the spelling right, I won't get your email. That's a good way to reach me. I'll check that every day. You can also contact me through Canvas, of course. Office hours, such as they are, will be Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9 to 11 in the morning. Ahead of time, email me and say, I'd like to have a meeting remotely. And I'll arrange for that. I think I'll use Big Blue Button. And I'll make sure that you get an invitation to that meeting. And that's how we'll handle that. Potentially, we could meet at the college. I'm sure I'll be at my office pretty regularly. I'm at the Charleston campus in the A building, which is right there at the corner of Torrey Pines and Charleston. It's actually right the medical sciences building. But sometimes they have a hard time finding enough offices for faculty. So me and some colleagues are down there in the basement. It's actually, I have a really big office. I'm not going to complain. Plus, in the summer, it's relatively cool. But you would enter that building as if you were going to a dental appointment. Go down either the stairs or take the elevator down to the lower level. And then you kind of work your way around the corner, and there's a suite of offices back there, and I'm the first one on the right. That's just in case. If you come in the other way, on the other side of the building, or on the side where the B building is, it's very hard to find it. So don't even do that. Okay. So there's that. What are we covering in here? I'll come back to that in just a little bit, but as you might imagine, we're covering American national politics and government, but also Nevada government and politics. when you get a chance to check out the syllabus, which is genuinely useful, because it kind of is a contract between the instructor and the students. Promises made, promises kept kind of a thing. You'll see there's some, verbiage about the course's purpose, course objectives, things that you should get out of this at the end. And then there's a little section there, right, on required readings. Really just one. Right now I have the 4th edition in front of me. I'm actually assigning the 5th edition. I know I have it here. I just got back from a trip. I got to find it. Honestly though, 4th edition, 5th edition, 3rd edition, it's all good. They make some minor changes over the years so they can keep selling new copies. If you can find a cheaper copy that's a little older, that's going to be fine. But at least nominally, I'm assigning the 5th edition, most recent. It's called American Government in Black and White. And I've also posted on the Canvas where you can take a look at that and order it. But these days, right, there's so many different ways to get a book. Rent online, buy online, Amazon, all the different options there. I'm sure you know more about that than I do. So that's the primary and really the only assigned text per se. Although that being said, I do use select chapters from a very famous book called The Sagebrush State, Michael Bowers over at UNLV. A series of chapters on Nevada politics. But you don't have to worry about that, because I'll be posting PDF files of each of those chapters right on Canvas. All right. Now I did make sure that the library has infinite copies to loan out electronically to students. You can do it that way. But again, I'll just be posting the PDF files for your convenience right on Canvas. So no worries there. And then I say ancillary readings. Basically any additional readings I might assign on Canvas. You'll see that we're going to have some current events quizzes based on current events articles that I'll post. That's also in a sense assigned reading. But again, those will be in the form of either Word documents or PDF files for you guys. All right. What are the elements of your grade in this course? Exams. That's the core of everything, all right? 4 exams. Spaced throughout the summer, although it's only 8 weeks, so. But spaced out pretty evenly, so roughly once every 2 weeks. The first 3 exams will be a combination of multiple choice and short answer. And then the 4th exam, the last exam, will be just multiple choice. And none of the exams are comprehensive. They only cover, a chunk of material, a discrete chunk of material. All right. Typically it's going to be about 50 or 60 multiple choice questions and then 5 short answer terms. And we'll talk more about that as exam 1 gets a little closer. You're also going to have 5 quizzes, current events quizzes, based on current events articles that I will post. Now, for each one of those quizzes, I'll create a module that includes the 3 articles and the quiz itself. All right, I'll typically open up that quiz. I'll typically post the articles about a week before the quiz is due, and then I'll leave the quiz open for a couple days. Take it at your own leisure. For most students, that's a chance to improve their grade, because these articles are relatively brief. You have them right in front of you. You can reference them while you're taking the quiz. I do put a time limit on it, but I think it's a very reasonable time limit. I forget what it is. Is that like 20 minutes, 10 questions? And then I drop your lowest one at the end of the semester, at the end of the summer. All right. But yeah, most of your grade comes from the exams. A portion comes from the quizzes, and then a portion comes from the discussion threads. So for each module, each chunk of material, basically each chapter, I'll have a discussion thread. Thing to remember there, and a lot of students miss this. 2 posts I'm looking for. 1 original post and then one post where you're responding to somebody else's post. Okay, so for each discussion thread, I need 2 posts. One original, one responsive. All right. How does that fall out in terms of proportion of your grade for each of those assignments? The exams together, the 4 of them, count for 75% of your grade. That's 3/4 of your grade. That's where most of the action is. 15% from the quizzes, and 10% from the discussion threads. And again, really, not only does the quizzes typically give students a chance to improve their grade, but so do the discussion threads. I grade those pretty generously. To the extent that you can, I do like to see in the discussion threads some reference to what we're talking about and reading in that module, right? Rather than just off the top of your head opinions. Informed discussion threads. What else do we have here? We have a great library. You can access it online or physically. That would, where it's appropriate, avail yourself of that fantastic resource. There's a lot of boilerplate language about what services are offered to students by CSN. Those are, for many students, very important, but I have it all there. And then that gets us to the course outline. And this will give you a good sense, a clear sense of what we're covering here. And although I don't think any of it should be terribly surprising, but just for clarity, right? I start out in a way that's a little different. I lay out these 2 models at the beginning that I think are powerful for both understanding and explaining and evaluating American politics. An empirical model for understanding it, right, the study of that which is empirical, and then a normative model for thinking about, what are we shooting for here? What is our goal? What would be the best form of politics? What's our ideal? That's how we evaluate our politics, right? This is what happened. Congress passed a law. This is why that happened. These are the dynamics that led to that. So that's the empirical model. And then the normative model is, well, what do we think about that law? Does it advance the quality of our democracy? Or does it erode the quality of our democracy? Because if it advances it, we'll say, yay, that and more of that, perhaps. And if it somehow erodes the quality of our democracy, right, well, why did we do that? And what can we do to get rid of it? Or whatever. Right? Obviously, the normative model becomes much more subjective, right? Depends on your political views. This was a good law, this was a bad law. That's going to often be shaped right by your ideology, by your politics. That's understood, and that's fine. The empirical model tends to be less controversial, right? And we got the Affordable Care Act, and this is why, right? Obama was president. He's a Democrat. Democrats controlled both chambers of Congress at the time by large margins. The court at the time was kind of 50-50. And that's why we get it, and that's why the Supreme Court has never completely destroyed it or overturned it. But that's why, right? Well, nobody sort of debates that. Yeah, that's why. Whether you like it or you don't like it, that's why we got it. Right? Now, did it improve our democracy or erode our democracy? Well, that's more subjective, right? And there we can debate endlessly and often do. It was progress. It was going backwards. It made us stronger, it made us weaker, on and on. So those are the 2 models. I think it's really important to have those tools in hand at the beginning. That's what we use throughout the summer. Now, there's really not anything about that per se in our textbook, but what I use to exemplify those 2 models, to demonstrate how they work in practice, which is always important, right? Not just theory, but practice. I draw on the Black Civil Rights Movement and the link between that movement and passage of major civil rights legislation in 1964 and 1965, right? The Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. So apropos of that, you'll see, I want you to read right at the beginning here, pages 142 to 154 in our textbook, American Government in Black and White, because that talks about the the Black Civil Rights Movement. So that'll help you better understand what I'm talking about as I explain those two models. All right, that's a way to get started with reading. So yeah, I know we're jumping ahead to the Civil Rights chapter, and we'll come back to that in just a few weeks. But for now, I just want you to read that one small section, just to fill in the blanks for better understanding how these two models work in practice. All right? So that's how we start out. And somewhat cleverly, I suppose, I call it the preamble module, right? It's what we do before we really get down to brass tacks. And from there, all right, we start to move into more standard coverage that you'd expect in this course. We're going to talk about Chapter 1 in our book. But not just Chapter 1. I'm going to add some things of my own special sauce. All right? So we're going to talk about American political culture. That's covered in the book. What is our political culture? What are things that we believe as a people? Because that turns out that influences our politics to a very high degree. Our culture, political culture. We're going to talk about our changing demographics. Oddly enough, our book doesn't really cover that, although it sort of covers it throughout the entire book, but they don't have a concentrated section in Chapter 1. So I'm going to talk about that sort of on my own. You'll see that on Canvas. I'll have slides and so forth, lecture notes and so on. Things about our changing racial and ethnic demographics and how that shapes our politics. Our changing age demographics and how that shapes our politics. How we have different regional demographics that influence our politics, right? The South is more conservative, the Pacific Northwest and West Coast more liberal, the Midwest somewhere in between, although increasingly maybe leaning more to the sort of conservative side of things, the East Coast more liberal, on and on. And we'll also play that out, right here in Nevada. Northern Nevada more conservative, Southern Nevada more liberal, growing Latino population in Nevada, reshaping our politics, that sort of thing. Also talk about what it means to have a democracy, a constitutional democracy. Some call that a republic. I'm like, that's cool. I don't want to get caught in semantics. Whether you call it a republic or a constitutional democracy, it's the same damn thing, just slightly different words to describe the same thing. An important role for the majority, but also, right, an important role for the rule of law, a constitution, a Bill of Rights, limits on the majority, right? And then we'll talk a bit about citizenship. And what does it mean to be a citizen? Who's a citizen? Who's not a citizen? Who's an American? Who's not an American? Because that's not exactly the same question as who's a citizen and who's not a citizen. You could argue that we have a lot of people in America today that they may not be citizens. They might even be undocumented. They might have a green card. But in a broad sense, are they still American? And often they've been here maybe for decades and contributed in important ways and built a family and a business. Made important contributions, right? Are they American, even if they're not a citizen? Perhaps. Something to talk about. We'll see that that's important because that's a foundational question, isn't it? If you think about the preamble to the Constitution, right? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, right? Who's included in we the people? That is such a foundational question. Oh my gosh, so foundational. So we'll explore that. And not all of that's covered in Chapter 1 of our book. Some of it is, some of it's not. But it's all covered on the stuff I'm posting on Canvas in that Module 1. So we'll talk about that next. And I do spend more time at the beginning on the early material. It's more complicated material. It's more sprawling material. It's super foundational. So we're going to start out slowly in that sense, and then we'll pick up speed as we go along and get to more discrete topics like Congress or the presidency. Module 2, trying to give you a flavor again for what we're doing in here. Module 2, 2A I call it. We'll talk about American history, the founding of the American Republic, right? What led up to the American Revolution, what came out of that revolution. We'll talk about the U.S. Constitution as our founding document. Talk about the Declaration of Independence, how that shapes our politics today. It's not just history, it lives in us today. In some ways, we are who we were, both for better and for worse. We'll talk about the founding of the great state of Nevada. It would become a state in 1864, but you need to go further back than that, right? And how that has shaped our politics here in Nevada right up to today. You know, I just got back from a trip to Ely to go to Great Basin National Park. And you can pretty much guarantee as you drive up the 93 that almost all the land you see is owned by the feds. And you'd be like, right, why is that? Why is 85% of Nevada owned by the federal government? And it's because, right, those were the terms of the deal back in 1864. Congress said, look, we'll get you into the Union. We'll make you a state. You are a territory. We want to make you a state, upgrade you, promotion. But in order to get that promotion, you got to give us a little something, including the land. Back then, it was more than 85%. Today, it's right around 85%. That number slowly goes down over time as the federal government auctions off land for development, mostly in the Las Vegas Valley and around Reno. But it's always going to be pretty high, as far as I can tell. All right, that's related to our founding. We'll talk about American federalism. Right, we have a complex division of power. I was just talking about this with my wife. We have some number of dogs. I won't reveal the exact number. And we live in the city of Las Vegas. And so the question is, right, what's the legal limit on the number of dogs that we can have? Well, it turns out city of Las Vegas has one number, but Clark County has a different number, a lower number. So my wife's question was, you're a political scientist. Which rule applies here? Is it the county? Because we live in the county, but we also live in the city. The city has one regulation, the county has another. Federalism, it's complicated. Overlapping lines of jurisdiction. Who has jurisdiction? Turns out it's going to be the city. So we're going to be governed here on that issue by the city. So why does the county even have a policy on that? Well, because it turns out a lot of Clark County is what's called unincorporated. It's not governed by a local government. The only ones we have here in Clark County, right? Well, I should qualify that. The ones that I know of. North Las Vegas, Henderson, and I guess Mesquite. Right, the rest of it's essentially unincorporated. Right? I mean, yeah, technically you would say, well, the Strip is mostly in Paradise, or UNLV is in Paradise, and what about Enterprise, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, amusing, but not significant. Right? Those are really just sort of map designations. You don't have a city council for Paradise. You don't have the mayor of Paradise. Okay, Paradise doesn't have rules governing number of dogs or cats you can have. They don't impose taxes. They're really just designations on a map. All right, so most of Clark County is unincorporated, and that's where the county rules would apply, like on the Strip, or really in a huge chunk of the valley. So that's fun facts to know and learn. Now, so we know that, right? We have state governments, Nevada. We have local governments, cities and counties, for example. We also have, right, sort of interesting entities like the Southern Nevada Water Authority. That's a regional water authority. It gets so complicated. It's kind of crazy. And what else do we have? We have HOAs, right? Homeowners associations. I'm now in a historic neighborhood near downtown that doesn't have an HOA. I'm kind of like, yay. But it's hard to get free of those things, right? They're private forms of government. So for here in Nevada, we'll need to talk about not just state and local governments, but also HOAs, right? Local and private. And then we have Indian tribes, right? Indian tribes, like the Moapa Paiute, a little bit north of here. They have a special designation, right? That's kind of their own thing. That's part of American federalism. And then we have territories like Puerto Rico and Guam and the Northern Marianas Islands. That's part of our federal system. It's complicated. It's crazy. So we'll talk about all that good stuff. I'm really trying to give you guys a good grounding in better understanding our various forms of politics and governance. Because I think that just makes us better citizens. and it makes you better understand sort of the context within which we live, and where the power lies, and then how to make an impact on it. And the more we understand how things work, the better we can sort of shape how things work. It's so important, I think. Well, I'm going to say that, right? I'm a political scientist. We'll talk about Nevada's state and local fiscal politics, which I know sounds dry, but it's really not. It's how we raise money here and how we spend it. What could be more important than that? Follow the money, right? So we'll talk about what state taxes we have here in Nevada. Famously, right, we don't have an income tax, but we do have a pretty big sales tax. At the local level, we have property taxes. Those are very important for things like parks and recreation, law enforcement, firefighting, and to a lesser extent, public schools. So it turns out public schools in Nevada are mostly funded by the state sales tax, which is pretty weird. Most states put it almost all on the property tax. Not us. We have a very low property tax. Therefore, you need more taxes to fund things like education, like the state sales tax. People should know. So we'll talk about all that. And then how do we spend it? How is money spent by local governments? How is money spent by the state? Civil liberties, right? Bill of Rights type stuff, gun rights, free speech rights, property rights, the right to freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, all that good stuff. We'll talk about civil rights, kind of a theme of the course, and whether that's the Black Civil Rights Movement, the American Indian Movement, the women's movements over history, all sorts of good stuff. Right up to Me Too, all of that good stuff, civil rights stuff. Because in many ways, you can tell the story of American politics through the lens of civil rights. Well, we start out kind of in a bad place on civil rights, and today we're in a much better place, but arguably still a lot of work to do. And that's no shame on us, It's just the nature of the beast. It's an ongoing process. We'll talk about the politics of Congress, that institution that we love to hate. We'll talk about the politics of the Nevada legislature. We'll talk about the politics of the executive branch at the federal level, the federal bureaucracy, what Trump has called the deep state, to make it sound fun and interesting, what a political scientist would call the bureaucracy. We'll talk about the Nevada executive branch. We'll talk about the American presidency, which is different than the bureaucracy. We'll talk about the politics of the federal courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll talk about the politics of Nevada's courts. We'll talk about the politics of public opinion. We'll talk about the politics of the media, hot topic. The politics of social movements, which is often sort of cross-fertilizing the issue of civil rights. We'll talk about the politics of interest groups, the politics of our political parties. Again, something that we love to hate, but it turns out you need them to have a functioning democracy, at least two. And then the politics of voting in elections. Kaboom, all right? So that's the syllabus. And in covering the syllabus, we've also covered what we're doing in here this semester, this summer. 8 weeks. 8 weeks. All right, so I'm going to stop it there because we've gone 28 minutes, and that's a long time to go. I'm going to post a second one talking about how to navigate Canvas for this course. Thanks all. And again, welcome. And I'll do my best to keep these videos certainly under 30 minutes. I try to keep them closer to 20 minutes. I'm just coming off a sabbatical, so I'm full of piss and vinegar. And maybe I'm talking a little more than I normally would when I'm tired and beaten down. All right, thanks all. And again, welcome.